I'm Jenny Sloan, and I'm president of the Constitution Project. And I want to welcome you all here tonight to celebrate our 20th anniversary and to honor our true constitutional champions. I can't think of any people who more deserve to be honored tonight than two of our founders, Lord Halpern and Mickey Edwards. Thank you also to Jones Day and its partner and our board member, Larry Rosenberg, for once again providing this magnificent room for us. You wouldn't be here tonight if this hadn't been a troubling and a confusing year for all of us, and because all of us care so much about the state of our political system, our Constitution, and our country itself. We'll just have to wait to determine whether we've been seeing any steps toward bipartisanship and putting our country rather than party first, or whether we will continue to see more overstepping by the executive branch, failure by Congress to fulfill its constitutionally required duties, and disrespect for the legitimacy of the courts. I also worry that divisiveness and anger and even hate is becoming normal in America. I worry that with the unending cycle of news, we seem to jump from one crisis to another without ever stopping to adequately address any of it. Whatever the reality, I am really proud that the Constitution Project just keeps doing the work that all of you so generously support. I want to tell you about just some of the successes that we've had in the past year. Jake Lefroux is our expert on privacy and surveillance issues and a leader in the field. Both location privacy, one of the most common forms of police surveillance, and facial recognition, an invasive and currently unchecked tool, have profound implications for individual privacy. They allow the government, with frightening accuracy and too often within adequate oversight, to track our every movement. Because cell phones are now so integrated into our lives, TCP has joined with other advocates on a Supreme Court amicus brief on cell phone tracking. It highlights the importance of Fourth Amendment protections, and a favorable decision would be one of the most significant privacy decisions in decades. Police body cameras are very much in the news, as I'm sure you know, and we produced the first comprehensive report on them that had recommendations supported by both civil liberties experts and law enforcement. We're confident that our work in this area will help police departments develop reasonable uses for these techniques that produce more accountability and that check overbroad surveillance and prevent abuse. Madhu Grewal is leading a coalition effort to oppose the Trump administration's revocation of an Obama administration policy limiting federal programs that provide military equipment to law enforcement. Before we decide if these weapons should be in our communities, on our streets, and in our schools, we need better training, record keeping, and oversight, and we need to make sure that our taxpayer dollars are not misspent. Our coalition letter asks Congress to impose a moratorium until the Defense Department fully investigates the largest federal program providing police departments with this equipment. Scott Ream and Catherine Hawkins spearheaded an updated version of our 2009 handbook, When Congress Comes Calling. It couldn't be more relevant right now because it examines growing executive branch threats to Congress's investigative authority and demonstrates through a series of case studies how oversight works in practice. Based on the report of our influential task force on detainee treatment, Catherine and Scott have responded to congressional requests for help preparing for nomination hearings, particularly in cases where nominees had previously advocated for or played a role in the CIA's so-called enhanced interrogation program. Thanks to Sarah Turberville and David Janowski, death penalty lawyers nationwide continue to count on TCP to help correct profound injustices that persist in capital cases. Last year, we organized amicus briefs and deployed our cadre of unlikely allies to support 3 death row prisoners. In each case, counsel for the prisoners told us that our work was vital to curing an injustice that had put their clients on death row. Dwayne Buck was sentenced to death after a Texas jury heard a psychologist testify that Mr. Buck was, and I'm quoting, more dangerous because he was black. Our amicus brief from former prosecutors addressed the unique role of the prosecutor to do justice, not to just win it at any cost. In overturning Mr. Buck's death sentence, Chief Justice Roberts said of the racially discriminatory testimony that some toxins can be deadly in small doses. In Moore v. Texas, the court stopped Mr. Moore's execution, citing our amicus brief in finding unconstitutional Texas's method of determining whether a defendant is intellectually disabled and thus cannot be executed. We also helped counsel for Ivan Telugu's devise a clemency campaign, including assembling a bipartisan letter from former Virginia attorneys general, which convinced Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe to commute his death sentence because of strong evidence of his innocence. Litigators challenging the constitutionality of money bail also sought our help. Too many times in this country, wealthy and dangerous defendants can purchase their freedom, but the poor and innocent remain incarcerated. Just last month, we helped organize prosecutors and other law enforcement, faith leaders, and conservatives to support a legal challenge to Harris County, Texas's practice of locking up poor defendants simply because they were unable to pay their bail. We helped organize 4 amicus briefs, including one by over 100 current and former police chiefs, elected prosecutors, and U.S. attorneys in the circuit where the case arose, asking the court to continue an injunction on wealth-based incarceration. And we released a comprehensive report on Oklahoma's death penalty system. Madhu Grewal spearheaded a bipartisan commission co-chaired by a Democratic former governor, a Republican former policymaker, and a judge who sat on the state's highest criminal court. Its members spanned an array of positions on the death penalty and experiences with it. After well over a year of work, the commission strongly supported continuing a moratorium that followed 2 botched executions in the state. The report has been cited nationwide, the press has been extraordinary, and advocates and litigators are now relying on the commission's recommendations on counsel, race, cost, and a host of other matters. None of the commissioners knew TCP before they began their work, but once they learned about us, they concluded that our reputation for integrity and even-handedness made us the right organization to manage the commission. This work is one of the best examples of what TCP does and why its work is so vital. I've mentioned all but one of the members of our staff, and that person who I have not mentioned is the wonderful Shoshana Riley, who keeps our office running. I want to convey my thanks to her. All of us at TCP are so grateful to all of you who provided pro bono and other support for so many of the efforts I've talked about and for our work in general. And now let me turn the microphone over to Wade Henderson, who I'm sure in this crowd needs no further introduction. One of us is short.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have been asked to give a bit of a tribute to Lord Albert. But before I do, let me say how pleased I am to be here tonight, honoring both Mort and Mickey. Congratulations to both of you. You so richly deserve the TCP, as they call it, project, the 2017 Constitutional Champions. I want to thank Jenny and the board of TCP for inviting me to participate in tonight's program. It's really quite extraordinary. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge Diane Hornlicker. What happens? Diane and I are longtime friends. Diane is a distinguished academic in her own right at American University School of Law. And over the years, I've had the privilege of actually learning a lot from you, Diane, so it's especially nice to see you. You know, this is really fitting recognition for two co-founders of TCP, whose careers really exemplify a commitment to sort of core constitutional values and to the importance of bipartisan outreach to accomplish those policy goals. You two are extraordinarily different personalities, but somehow you managed to end up at the same place, even though you started in very different locales. So it's really great to have both of you here. I've had the real joy of knowing and working with Mort for over 30 years. So the responsibility that you bestowed on me this evening is really quite meaningful, quite meaningful. About half the room, it appears, work for Mort Howell. I see a lot of my friends and colleagues who are here, and I know this is a huge reunion for those of us who work for Mort, and Mort, only you could sort of pull this together, because I'm not sure that we could have all been at the same place at the same time. Now, it's also a special honor for me to be joined subsequently at the podium by Susan Eisenhower. I just hosted a program this week celebrating the 60th anniversary of President Eisenhower's 1957 Civil Rights Act, which is not well known in the public debate, but which is responsible for the creation of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, the nation's civil rights law firm, and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which was the nation's conscience on civil rights. Both of those institutions were responsible for laying a foundation for the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Your grandfather was a tough man. He sent federal troops down to Little Rock, Arkansas, which is also celebrating the 60th anniversary of that accomplishment, to vindicate the rights of black school children under the Constitution of the United States. I'm telling you about Eisenhower. I love that guy. And I'm not even going to compare Herbert Brownell to Jeff Sessions. I'll leave that to the constitutional scholars here in the room, right? Now, I've been asked to share a couple of insights about Mort. Mort's pretty complex. He has many sides to his personality. As I said, I've worked with him for over 3 decades. And I have sort of, I guess, distilled 3 particular dimensions to his professional life. You know, he's got the whole background of international relations, foreign policy, and national security. That's what he's really most known for. But he also has a legendary career, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, in the civil and human rights policy space. And then I've also learned a lot from him as a leader in terms of his management of the ACLU Washington office. And I would say there's several of us in the room that could probably say the same thing, because many of Mort's policy team, when we left his sort of tutelage, work, colleague relationship at the ACLU, went on to head our own organizations for many, many decades. And that experience of working with you contributed significantly to that experience. Now, look, from a foreign policy and national security space, you know, that's the professionally dominant discussion about Mort. And he worked for 3 presidents, Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton. If you're really interested in it, I suggest you go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is really quite complete in terms of talking about Mort's experiences both at the Department of Defense, at the State Department, all that you did during the Vietnam War. Now, interestingly enough, Ken Burns' documentary is going to shine a new light on that entire experience. And so it's good for the country to know about it, but you were in the thick of things. And without sort of judging your role and engagement, I'll say two things. One, you were wiretapped. You didn't take it personally, but you were wiretapped. And it started in 1969, right? You discovered it in 1971. But your persistence in bringing truth to power ultimately resulted in a judgment against President Nixon in 1977 with damages of $1, which acknowledged the seriousness of the offense. I always credit you for staying the course. You could have easily been sidetracked, but that obviously was important to you, and you decided to make it. Also, Mort is known by some for his wry sense of humor. But I got a witness on that from the ACLU. He had a wry sense of humor. But this is one of Mort's famous quotes from the national security space. The NATO doctrine is that we will fight with conventional forces until we are losing. Then we will fight with tactical weapons until we are losing. And then we will blow up the world. And then I thought about Korea, and I said, damn, Mort, not funny. Okay? Not funny at all. But, okay, there it is. So, I want to talk a little bit, not about the Halpern you know, which is that national security sign. I want to talk about the Halpern you don't know. Now, I want to dispel something from the outset. Mort was often seen by people who don't know him as being incredibly aloof and somewhat arrogant and not good with people. That's terribly unfair. That's terribly unfair. He is incredibly shy. And David Halpern, his son, who is here with him tonight, David, I'm sure you would attest to that. Your father is very shy. So what some people interpret as being aloof is really shyness. Now, when it comes to thinking through social justice issues, there's no one who is a better partner. Mort is what I call a pragmatic idealist. Now, for some, that sounds like a little bit of an oxymoron. It sounds like maybe a contradiction. It's really not. Mort is an idealist, but he recognizes that progress, particularly in social justice space, is incremental. You may have a step forward, you may have 2 steps back, but you will ultimately get to your goal if you are persistent on issues, if you remain true and committed to constitutional values, and if you really bring, substance to the table to look at issues, and he did that. So, Mort is a pragmatic idealist. Now, the point that many don't know is that Halpern was often the sort of unreported intellectual ingredient in solving some of our toughest issues. Early on, Mort took an interest, for example, in the Salvadoran community that came to Washington in 1982 after the assassination of Oscar Romero in his church in San Salvador. Mort helped support both the development of a report and also a project at the ACLU to address those issues. When the immigration bill was being debated in 1987, the so-called Simpson-Mazzoli immigration bill, one of the big issues at the time was whether the employer sanctions that were being enacted into law would discriminate against Latinos and other people of color, simply because employers were anxious to make sure they had more defenders. Mort, interestingly enough, sort of focused on trying to fashion a solution to the discrimination problem. Some of us are going to say, look, there can't be an adequate solution fashioned. Let's move away from this. But he's committed to solution-oriented thinking, and he helped forge a solution which actually worked. It helped create the Office of Special Counsel in the Department of Justice, specifically focused on immigration-related employment discrimination. He worked with me on the Japanese American Redress Bill. It's called the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. There are lots of people who were involved in that. Mickey, people who were involved in that, Secretary Minette and others. But Mort was one of the people who wanted to make sure that the ACLU, which had such a checkered history during World War II with Japanese internment, actually came out on the side of justice on this issue. He did a lot of work in that regard. And I could name bills affecting the death penalty, like the Racial Justice Act. I could talk about the Fair Housing provisions in 1988, which added for the first time a disability provision. I saw Hy Feldblum here in the room, who was a commissioner at the EEOC. Hy worked with us on that project. I can think of numerous issues and bills. The Civil Rights Act in 1991. Marsha Greenberg was here from the National Women's Law Center. And I'm not going to do the roster, but Mort was engaged in civil rights advocacy at the highest level and did so with extraordinary aplomb and made a significant difference in the passage of laws that actually provided justice to people who previously hadn't done it. He was also a big supporter of human rights. What sent me to, I must say, it was a phenomenal experience. I went to Grenada in 1984 after President Reagan invaded Grenada on behalf of the medical students. So, you remember that? Total pretense. And it was really quite an experience. And because of Mort, I was able to go and to examine the issue. And his work on human rights treaties continued. He was involved in the passage of the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination in '94 with Joe Biden. I was at the NAACP at the time, testified on it. It was a great issue. He was also recently involved in the effort to pass the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, known as CRPD. Bob Dole was intimately involved in this effort. We were disappointed that we didn't get it in the last year, but I'm confident that the nature of these things is such that we will pull it off. And I give help and a lot of credit for laying the foundation of that. So that's the second component of Mort's piece. And then to sort of wrap it up, I'm going to talk about his leadership experience, because I really think it's important, and that is the third dimension of Mort that is rarely talked about. Look, what can I say? Mort did a terrific job in running the ACLU Washington office, national office. He was committed to all aspects of its work, all aspects of it. The thing that I learned most from him, and one of the most important lessons, is that if you don't care who gets the credit, you can accomplish a lot in DC, a lot. And he was an example of that. So all of us who were involved in the work of the office, and as I said, half the audience here falls in that category, can probably say that it was Mort's personal decency, his integrity, that were as much a part of his leadership skill as his substance on issues. I give him credit for being bright, but bright ain't the price of admission, and everybody bright. The question is, can you hook it up in a way that makes a difference at the end of the day on issues of importance, and you did that well. So I want to conclude, guys, by saying that I'm sure some of you didn't know this. I'm not Jewish. I know that catches some of you by surprise. I don't even play one on TV. However, I think the term about Mort is that he's a mensch. Is that right? Yeah, he's a mensch. And so while I really admire the Mort Wikipedia thing, I encourage you to go and take a look at it. I actually love the Mort that nobody knows, because that's the Mort that I have come to know and to rely on most often. And he is the person who really, in my judgment, just encapsulates what we're looking for a friend and colleague and leader of the civil rights movement. And so I salute you, but I say it's really been an honor and a blessing to have worked with you over the years. Mort Halperin, please come and accept the award.
Wade, without knowing it, dropped in the middle of his talk the title of the memoir that I've just begun to write. And we'll get a prize at the end of the evening for anybody who can figure out what the title was. I'm grateful for the presence here of so many of you, so many who worked with Wade and with me at the ACLU, but also colleagues who had me inflicted upon them in other incarnations at the State Department and the Policy Planning staff, and now at the Open Society Foundation. And when Ginny called to say that I was going to get this award, she told me that I would be sharing it with my good friend Mickey Edwards, which only added to my pleasure. Mickey and I, as you may not know, both started life as a republic. Indeed, since it seems to be part of everyone's talk to say nice things about Eisenhower, I will reveal for the first time to a public audience that I was the chairman of Students for Eisenhower at Columbia University in 1956. Best decisions I ever made. Mickey and I don't belong to the same party, but we do share the same devotion to the Constitution. And while I still hope he will evolve, we nevertheless remain together as supporters of the Constitution. And thus it is not surprising that we found ourselves on board of the project that defends the Constitution. And I am proud of the service there and proud to have served with him and proud to share this award with him. Now you all know that the Constitution Project started 10 years ago. What you may not remember was, what? 20 years. 20. Sorry. Fine. You may not remember that at the time that it was being created, the principal threat to the Constitution, it now seems quite tame, was a plethora of proposed constitutional amendments. The project's first undertaking was to try to craft standards for when it was appropriate to amend the Constitution. Surprisingly, as we started working on the project, we discovered that there was almost no literature, no policy literature, no academic literature on the subject. And that effort that I delighted to join, to develop the criteria and to make them relevant to the political process, is one of the most intellectually challenging and consequential endeavors of my career. That report, which had the wonderful title, Great and Extraordinary Occasions, Developing Guidelines for Constitutional Change, helped to defeat the pending constitutional amendments, none of which should have been passed. And it remains to this day a key resource for people confronting the question, is this an appropriate subject for a constitutional amendment? And if it's not, why it is not? And it's become a motto, I think, for all of the work of the Constitution Project. Nonpartisan, rigorous, and done in a way that is policy relevant and has an impact on the debates every day. And as you heard from Ginny, and as you know from the past, the Constitution Project has continued to engage in this process. And under Ginny's leadership, it has developed a reputation for meticulously prepared and reasoned, nonpartisan reports, including one I want to single out on torture, which I think played an important role in saving the conscience of this country in the face of that behavior. But those reports have had a significant impact, not only on the specific issues that they deal with, but on training people to ask the question, what is consistent with the Constitution? What should we do if we want to adhere to the values of the Constitution and not simply get an outcome that deals with our preferences for a particular moment? Now, I'm proud to have played a part in creating the Constitution Project and to have served for many years on its board. As you're all aware, we live in different and difficult times. And I want to focus my remaining remarks to suggest something about how I think we ought to approach the dangers to the Constitution that we face today. And it may not come as a surprise to you that I am Jewish. And therefore, I have gone back to my Jewish heritage, and I want to suggest that what we need to do is to build a fence around the Constitution in the way that Judaism commands us to build a fence around the Torah, to forbid actions which might bring us closer to violating a literal command of the Bible. So how do we build a fence around the Constitution? The most important thing we can do is to enact legislation that constrains presidents so that they are neither tempted nor able to violate the Constitution. We also need to restrain ourselves. We must resist the temptation to enhance presidential power when the incumbent is somebody that we trust or that we voted for. We must never forget that the expansion of power can and will be used by presidents who do not share our devotion to the Constitution. Let me give you some examples from recent days about this. War powers is, in my view, the single most important example of the failure of our polity to build a fence around the provision that says Congress shall declare war. And I'm proud to say that the Constitution Project, over the years, has been deeply engaged in this issue and has led the fight to say what is clear. The Constitution is very clear. On some issues it's murky. On this one, it is very clear. And yet the American people and the Congress have permitted presidents time and time again to take us to war without appropriate congressional authorization. We have let the War Powers Act, timid if important first step to restoring Congress's power, be ignored and violated. Now, if we worry now, as I suspect most of us do, that the executive branch may take us to war against North Korea or against Iran or expand the war against ISIS without congressional approval, we need to understand that the blame is not with the Constitution, but the blame is with our failure, our collective failure, to build a fence around that provision of the Constitution. It is not too late to do so. Emoluments is another example. Until recently, if any of us gave any thought to the emoluments clause of the Constitution, we likely assumed that it could be enforced against the president to prevent him from personally benefiting financially from payments by foreign governments. We now know that we need a fence around that constitutional provision as well, which covers conflicts of interest, nepotism, as well as foreign payments, and which effectively prevents presidents from violating those provisions. Now, not only have we failed to put in place effective constraints on presidential power, we have often, all of us, I assume some of you have seen wisdom of both, but most of us have supported and even urged expansions of that power and supported reductions in the ability of the other branches to resist when our president was in office. Let me give you a couple of recent examples. For me, the most serious recent example is the limits that were placed on the right of senators to filibuster adopted in the early days of the Obama administration. It is one of the most, in my view, egregious examples of how easily we lose sight of the need to preserve checks and balances, even because we see loosening them as necessary to get the policy objective of the day. We pay a heavy price now for having removed the right in the Senate to filibuster the executive branch and now all judicial appointments. As a result, we have an Attorney General and a Supreme Court Justice who were confirmed with less than 60 votes and whose adherence to constitutional values was not rigorously tested in the confirmation process. We can be grateful that cooler heads prevailed and prevented the effort to eliminate the filibuster for legislation and continue to do so. That effort, in my view, deserves the support of all who seek to preserve and defend the Constitution. My last example concerns the toleration of acts that exceed the President's constitutional powers because we are unhappy with what Congress has done or failed to do. We have, for example, permitted presidents of both parties to use the made-up power of a signing statement to exercise the non-existent right to veto parts of a bill passed by the Congress. We have supported presidential orders, which any fair reading of the Constitution requires congressional authorization. Our Constitution is strong, and I believe we will survive the current crisis with our liberties intact. but whether we do is already far too close a question. As we confront these challenges, I am more grateful than ever for Ginny's extraordinary leadership and that of the entire team at the Constitution Club. It is why I am honored to receive this award and why I thank you all for being here and giving your support.
Thank you for your wonderful remarks. And now I'm honored to introduce someone else who needs no introduction, and that is Susan Eisenhower, who will present the award to me.
Virginia. Well, first of all, let me say what a tremendous honor it is to be here tonight to present an award to Mickey Edwards, a great friend, and to honor both of the awardees tonight, Lloyd Hoffman and Mickey Edwards. And to tell you that it's a tremendous honor to be here at this organization, to hear more about the Constitution Project. I've been familiar with its work, but not in a way that I could really understand the spirit of what is behind this organization. And I must say that I've been extraordinarily, not only impressed by everything I've heard this evening, but it's given me an enormous lift. I'm sure many of you have been, I think, distressed, bewildered somewhat by what's going on in this city. And there are times I'm involved in, my life's work has been in an area where anybody who knows anything about the subject must keep their mouths shut because of the way people are talking about each other. My career was in U.S.-Russian relations. And it's really a breath of fresh air to come to a place where we are reminded of the core values that this country stands for. From the bottom of my heart, this country is better than what's happening here right now. And so let me just say that one of the most curious expressions I hear today is this idea that any foreign power could be a threat to our democracy. I have to tell you, if we're quoting Dwight Eisenhower, he once famously said that only Americans can hurt America. And that's why I'm really honored to be here tonight to honor Mickey Edwards and be part of this ceremony, because it seems to me that this founding 20 years ago is one of the most noble attempts I've heard of to actually stand up and be sure that we ourselves as Americans do nothing to threaten our democracy, and that we will do everything in our power to avoid hurting this country that we love so much. Now, I'd like to say something about Mickey. We don't have a long history. We've been friends and colleagues for years, but we have not had the opportunity to spend quite so many moments together as you and Wayne have, Mort. But let me say that sometimes there's some power in an admirer coming forward. And I am, in this context, reminded of one of the smartest things I ever heard about leadership. You know, we have also all acknowledged that in addition to having our constitutional principles under attack, that we have really an extraordinary leadership deficit today, a leadership crisis. Mind you, we've been saying leadership crisis probably for decades, but we really have one now. And one of the smartest things I ever heard on this subject was somebody who said to me, how is it that we have billions and billions and billions of dollars spent on leadership studies when nobody can name any? I mean, if you go down the street and say, name me a leader, you'll never get an answer to that question, despite the fact that we've got this gigantic industry training people for that. So I have been called upon to speak on leadership issues from time to time, and I always say it takes a couple of things. First of all, it helps to know whether, if you're influential, whether you're a star or whether you're a leader. And I wish I'd come up with that idea myself, but I heard it once from a very smart artist. In fact, we have a lot of stars in this city at the moment, but not many leaders. And this is what I want to say. That to me, Mickey, you have exemplified leadership. Not stardom, but leadership, which is so much more important than anything else this country needs, what is needed over the last couple of decades, but what it certainly needs now. Now, what is leadership then if it's not stardom? I guess there are certain people who might embody both qualities, but frankly, I think they're either one or the other. Stars, after all, have other planets circulating around them, but leaders, on the other hand, have to drive efforts. They have to drive opinion. They have to bring people together and move things forward. So, Mickey, your work as being doggedly bipartisan, despite your core values of being a conservative, this is an extraordinary thing. Mickey and I used to talk about party political matters, and he, at a time when nobody else felt that they could be critical of their own political party, was calling out a number of things that were later, I mean, he was very, very prescient. It was a marvelous book, of course, The Parties and the People. And so this capacity for leadership is not only bringing people to your ideas, it's bringing people to your cause. And in this, I just have to say that it's extraordinary to me that Mickey has taken his ideas and his passion for certain things and institutionalized them. That is leadership. And so he's institutionalized them. Of course, he was a distinguished member of Congress for 16 years, sitting on really some of the most important committees that body has. Of course, the House Appropriations and Budget Committees and the House Subcommittee on Foreign Operations, all extremely important. But, you know, it wasn't just serving his country in that way. He took it and turned it into organization building that brought not just legislative change, of course, but ordinary people, non-governmental organizations into the vital discussions underway in this country. There's so many to mention, including his role as a founding trustee of Heritage Foundation, and of course this critical organization that he started as a co-founder. And so let me say, Mickey, that I don't know what we do without you. You know, there's one thing to tell truth to power, there's another thing to tell truth from power. And I would like to say that it is nothing but an enormous honor for me to honor you, Mickey, a great leader. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great honor. Susan, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be, introduced by you, who I have admired, so much for so long. This is an honor for me because I love this organization. I love the Constitution Project. And I have to say, Wayne, I am Jewish, but he is a Mitch. Totally, I have followed Mort's leadership for so long, and here we were. Actually, Mort, I started as a Democrat. Some people think I've gone back there. I have admired what Mort did. I've admired what everybody here in the Constitution Project has done. The challenges that we have faced for the 20 years that we have worked together in the Constitution Project, as we have watched friends and foes alike ignore the Constitution when it was something that was serving the purpose that they were after. If the Constitution Project had not been here, we would have been in great trouble. And Mort, if I had not been sitting next to you in board meetings, working on some of these things, we would have lost a lot. I learned a lot from you, and I appreciate it. I want to single out Ginny Sloan, one of the most fantastic people I have ever known. Where'd you go, Ginny? Ginny, who built this organization. This was her dream. She created it, she built it, she's guided it, and you see, what you have built. And we are so lucky to have you and so proud. And I mean, I can't do this without also pointing out, recognizing my favorite teacher, and my dear wife, Professor Elizabeth Sherman, my Lizzie. I'm so glad you're here with me, Lizzie. So, to be here in an occasion like this, surrounded by so many friends, honoring the Constitution that I love and that we all love, would be a moment, you would think, of joy and celebration. But frankly, that's not a luxury that I think we can afford. We are at a time when the Constitution, or as too many Americans think of it, that somewhat interesting list of suggestions that was posted on the 1780s website, is not so much under attack as forgotten. Or if it is remembered, it's remembered and ignored as an interesting artifact in a history book. This marvelous Constitution, this groundbreaking document that simultaneously and specifically rejected both monarchy and party government, that so adeptly balanced empowerment and constraint, that created citizens, not subjects, is dying of both wounds and neglect. American constitutional government is a hybrid. It's a republic in governing structure. It is a democracy in the ways that we select those who will govern. And the system is in danger, both as a republic and a democracy. The Constitution is about values, great values, justice, liberty. It's about process, about the rule of law, habeas corpus. It's about our great protected rights, speech, worship, privacy. And as Julius Caesar found out, it's often those we thought were our friends who pose the greatest threat. This is an et tu moment. Our liberties are threatened by increasingly intrusive state surveillance. Justice is undermined by overzealous prosecutors, limited access to counsel, and the killing of unarmed men. Process is ignored by both left and right when constitutional constraints stand in the way of a desired political outcome. We have created and we remain blindly loyal to an obsolete and anachronistic 18th century partisan political system which divides us against each other and has rendered the People's Assembly incapable of governing, undermining the separation of powers, and fostered a semi-imperial presidency which too often rules by fiat, while Congress sits idle and reporters write that the White House is deciding whether to delegate writing a federal budget to its subordinates on Capitol Hill. Those of you who have long hoped for a strong presidency might want to rethink that. The founders gave us a great blessing, but they also gave us a great curse, because the constitutional system they left us can survive only if it maintains the trust of its citizens. And only if those citizens are capable of wisely using the power the Constitution places in their hands. The success of that democracy, therefore, rests on the performance of the government, on the wisdom of the citizens, and on a public trust that this system works, and that it works for all of us. and it does not. Our constitutional system rests on a foundation of institutions. Our education system, the media, the economic system, the justice system, a citizens' legislature. And every one of these institutions is failing in their responsibilities as protectors of a constitutional democracy. The United States Congress, the people's branch, the constitutional repository of the war power, the spending power, the taxing power, the regulatory power, cedes more and more authority to the executive branch. And in the process, it surrenders not its authority, but the people's authority. The Congress is meant to ensure, I should say here, there's a couple of former congressmen here, like Jim Jones, David Skaggs, and Cliff Stearns, who were in Congress when it really mattered and who did it right, and who represented the best. But the Congress was meant to ensure that the final word over government rests with the citizen and to serve as a check on executive power. But it has abandoned its responsibilities, and in doing so has weakened further any trust by the American people that their government works. George Washington spoke passionately about the importance of educating young Americans in the science of government. In a republic, he said, what species of knowledge can be equally important? Yet today, the study of the humanities is grossly underfunded. Many of our schools have changed their focus from the liberal arts, civics, critical thinking, philosophy, literature, history, to education for employment, high-class vo-tech schools. The basic building blocks of the liberal arts education that a constitutional democracy requires are increasingly disappearing from public education. Corporate America. I'm talking about the responsibilities that our citizenry has to help shore up the trust in a constitutional democracy. Corporate America has been seduced by claims that its only responsibility is to maximize profits, which it measures in short-term increments and achieves how? Outsourcing, layoffs, and a frustrating absence of customer access, accompanied by a tremendous gap between those who have much and those who have not enough. The problem, in my mind, is not inequality. The poor don't envy the rich. The problem is inadequacy. Too many who can't afford a visit to a doctor, or a car repair, or money for their children to get lunch at school. So what has this got to do with the Constitution? This is a Constitution project. What has this got to do with it? Why concern ourselves with corporate behavior? Why be bothered when the president of CBS boasts to Donald Trump whether or not he was good for America was good for CBS? How does the shooting of unarmed men relate to our constitutional crisis? Because if our society cannot demonstrate that our system works, there's nothing to bind the citizens to it. One poll in July showed that 1 in 5 Americans approve of the job Congress is doing. A poll in January showed half the population had an unfavorable opinion of both parties. A poll in April reported that only 1 in 5 trust the federal government to do the right thing most of the time. And as for that comment by the president of CBS, in September of last year, a poll showed that today less than 1/3 of the public trust the media, even a fair amount. And as for the political parties, 40% have abandoned the parties to become independents. When any political system and the institutions that underlie it are held in such disrepute by the people, the system itself is in danger. In November of last year, a New York Times headline said, "How stable are democracies? Warning signs flash red." The story was based on a study by professors at Harvard and the University of Melbourne, later published in the Journal of Democracy, that found that 1 in 4 millennials in the United States think free elections are important. Only 1/3 saw civil liberties as essential. A Freedom House study found that nearly 1/4 of millennials think democracy nearly one fourth of millennials think democracy is a bad political system. None of these are majorities. Sometimes people alter their views as they grow older. But the numbers are trending in a disturbing direction, and they're a warning. Think of the systemic failures these young people have known all their lives. This litany is all they know. So we have things to fix. The way our institutions operate, the outdated political system we cling to, a Congress which neither understands nor exercises its constitutional responsibility. So I wish I could be more celebratory, but the challenges are real and they are upon us. Thank you for listening. Thank you for this award, which I cherish. I cherish this organization that does so much to stand up for the Constitution that needs defending. So in closing, my favorite poet, Edna St. Vincent Millay, was commissioned to write a sonnet for the dedication of the statue in the Capitol honoring the women who fought for equal rights. She ended her sonnet with these words: "Forget the epitaph, take up the flag." That's our challenge. You remember, some of you remember Millay. That's our challenge. Our system of constitutional democratic government is at risk. It is not enough to look back at what was, not to wring our hands at what is. It's our job to take up the flag, for all of us to become constitutional champions, just as the Constitution Project has done all these years. The ideal of liberty, justice, and self-government itself are on the line.
Two incredible leaders honored tonight. Who knows what yesterday was? Anyone? That's right. For the first time, yesterday was Constitution Day, for those who didn't hear. And so it's fitting that we come together tonight to celebrate our founding charter. And this organization that Mort, Mickey, and Ginny built and have dedicated so much time and effort to over these past 20 years. And so I want to thank everyone who came out tonight because it's without your support, TCP couldn't be doing what it does day after day for these past 20 years. We've got a lot of folks who helped bring this together. I have to, on behalf of the board of directors, give special thanks to our colleague Larry Rosenberg and our friends here at Jones Day for hosting us once again in this beautiful space. If you didn't get outside to catch the view, please do before you leave. It's just absolutely fantastic. You heard this from both Mort and Mickey, but we can't say enough about all that Jenny has done for 20 years for the Constitution Project. Leading an incredible team of lawyers and staff who have done so much. You look at the reports, and the work done 20 years ago is as relevant today as it was back then. And you think about the projects that the TCP is working on right now, whether it's continued study and efforts on surveillance, on militarization of our police and peacekeepers, whether it's making sure that there is proper respect for the courts, that they are a co-equal branch. These things, we learned, at least I did, with Schoolhouse Rock so many years ago. But it seems that a lot of people have forgotten it, and so that's why we need this team of TCP to be doing their work. And so again, those of you who've helped with sponsorship and who came here tonight, thank you. But we need you to spread the word. ask your friends who weren't here to do what they can to help TCP, because we've got to keep this on. You're right, Susan. Bewildered, I think, is a good word. I feel that every day when I look at the newspaper. In these times, we just can't stop. So I'm going to say thank you. I think there's still some food. The gelato is in the corner. So please enjoy, spend some time celebrating here with our friends, Morty, Mickey, and thank you, and good night.